Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chuck.
Now, your website is proactiveandprepared.com. I love the way that sounds. It really is about preparation, and nobody does it better than the Israelis.
Absolutely. I think there are many things that can be learned. Like I like to say, the success in Israel is due to the unfortunate history of 70 years having to survive, right? So it's an environment where you either learn how to cope with things and survive and prevent them, or you just don't survive. So clearly there are things that have been battle tested. And there's another thing I usually say in the course is that our doctrines have created with a very special ink called blood. So definitely, by all means, you should tap into that experience and apply whatever is relevant here. And I think there are several things that we can apply to different situations here in the U.S. Yeah, so if we back up a little bit, so like you said, the name of our website is proactiveandprepared.com. And I think that's really the key message. It's all about being proactive. And I feel that sometimes, and we can see it through recent history here, we've been a little too reactive here in the field of security. I've talked about that, for example, in the field of airport security and airline security, where if you go back to like 2001, a little after 9/11, we had Mr. Richard Reed trying to use, he was called the shoe bomber, right? So as a result of that, as a consequence, we now all have to take our shoes off in the airport. Fast forward a few years, 2009, I believe it was, someone in London tried to use liquid explosives. Actually, a team of people wanted to blow up several incoming US airlines. And then as a result of that, we can now not take liquids, right? Water, mom cannot take milk past the TSA. So again, reactive. And if you fast forward a little more, there was also the underwear bomber, right? So fortunately, he got caught, and we can now still fly with our underwears on. But the point is, Chuck, that I think we've been spending billions of dollars in technology looking for yesterday's bomb, when actually the terrorists will use tomorrow's bomb. Because of the various mixtures of explosives in this case, it makes no sense to spend so much money to look for something that was used yesterday when there's so many other options. Plus, by the way, when you look at how many explosives were used, for example, in 9/11, you understand that explosives is not the only way to create damage. And so one of the things in Israel, we don't look for the bomb, we look for the attacker. Okay, and we do that, as you said, by implementing something that we call behavioral profiling, behavioral analysis. I can give you another example. I live here in South Florida, and either the two airports here or many others throughout the country that I visited, usually I think it's between 4 to 5 stations that you pass as a traveler when people speak to you. Authorities give you orders, right? Show me your ID, show me your boarding pass, and then they give you, there's 4 stations where people, authority, TSA, etc., they tell you what to do. In none of those stations do they actually listen to you, right? You could have duct tape on your mouth and go through and just do what they say. And if you're a bad guy that is going to do damage in there with means that are not detectable, then they're not going to have a way to find you. So one of the things they do in Israel is they spend as little as a few seconds with each passenger before they even get past the, before the first time they ask them for their documents. And they actually have a small conversation, a short conversation with them, right? Who are you? Where are you going? Where did you come from? And what they're looking at is signs of stress, and they take it from there. So that's one thing that we should definitely start implementing here. Not only give orders and talk, but also listen, so that we can identify these stress behaviors. And there's a lot of indicators that, believe it or not, with a short course, you could be, you could teach a lot of TSA men and women here to be able to identify that. So one of the key things in the Israeli model that we call that way is actually having a strategy. And the first thing in that strategy is defining what it is I am protecting, number one. And then number two, protection from what, right? And only after you have a really good conversation about those two things can you start coming up with a strategy. And so one of the first things we do there, once we have those two things identified, is we start gathering information, right? So what are the vulnerabilities of these, of the place or the person that you want to protect? And then we do what is called here an RTVA, right? So risk, vulnerabilities, threat assessment. And you, again, evaluate all that, hopefully taking into consideration what's called an adversarial mindset, right? So you want to be in the attacker's shoes, think like the attacker, think like the adversary, right? And understand, if you were the adversary, how would you attack this target, this asset? And only once you do that, you really come up with what we call the possible courses of action, right, of an adversary. And with all that in place, you can also understand what the vulnerabilities are of the system that you have in place to protect that asset. And then you start building what we call the master security plan. And that master security plan, so it has various elements, right? And depending if we're talking about a shopping center, a hotel, a school. But in general terms, one of the things we're gonna, in today's day and age, that we don't see here a lot, is we start with access control, right? So you need a perimeter. You need a secure perimeter. And then we need some type of access control. We need to know who's going into our area that we defined. And of course, our asset is way in the middle. So once you have that, and you identify your assets that you're protecting, etc., then we have something we call the tiers of security approach. And there's, we can go in very, very much detail into those tiers, but the way we treat them with my organization, with Technon, when we do, for example, a master plan for a client, is we talk about 4 basic tiers, right? So the first tiers, again, once you have that secure perimeter, you have access control. We have what we call detection. We have, first of all, what we call deterrence. So first of all, put systems in place that make a potential bad guy scouting out for potential targets, mark your target as a bad place to carry an attack in, right? Because of the security that is obvious, and this includes both overt and covert security. So first of all, deterrence. Have the bad people, have the bad guy go somewhere else. Number 2 is detection. Right, so we need either to use technology or to use human eyes, but we need to know when someone crosses that perimeter that we created, right? Then we have a third mechanism that we call delay, and there are several ways to create delay so that when someone crosses that perimeter, you're going to create some time and space so that you can get your 4th mechanism in place, which is response. And response today, in today's environment as well, you need to understand that law enforcement is going to be, like we say, when seconds count, help is only a few minutes away. So in those first few moments, those first few minutes, you will be alone there, and you better have a plan in place to respond to whatever incident happened there. And usually, also, this is the last thing, our response works in 2 directions, right? So one direction, one effort of the response goes and has the mission of neutralizing whatever the problem is, right? Or solving that problem. And then the other effort goes in the other direction towards the people, right? And we go into protocols of what are we doing? Are we doing a lockdown? Are we evacuating? Where are we evacuating? Who's evacuating? All these things, right? And it's a very dynamic situation that has to be constantly maintained. And here too, we very much advise to work hand in hand with your neighboring and local law enforcement community, right? So involve them in all the drills you do, et cetera, et cetera. And look, at the end of the day, it really comes into having the right mix between the physical, the technology, and the human factor sides of things. And we like to say that we have a formula in Israel that one of my colleagues calls the 20-20-60 formula, which is 20% physical, 20% technology, 60% human factor, right? So have the right protocols in place that go in line with the strategy we talked about. Thank you, Chuck. Stay safe.